The Northern Ireland question remained sensitive after Britain's exit from the EU. Now the conflict breaks out again, and that could only be the beginning of the argument, fears an expert. According to a British expert, the infringement proceedings against Great Britain mean a further deterioration in relations between London and Brussels. At the moment, neither side wants to give in, said the political scientist Simon Usherwood to the German press agency. The fear of further cases like this in the coming years. Above all, it will be exciting whether the proceedings will actually end up in court, said the expert. Then, the negative impression that both sides have of each other will intensify, and it will be even more difficult to rebuild the trust that has been so badly damaged by the Brexit process. The European Union initiated the procedure on Monday. The background is a dispute over Brexit special rules for the British province of Northern Ireland. Brussels accuses London of arbitrarily changing agreements and thus violating the Brexit treaty. The biggest test will be whether the UK will accept a decision against itself, Usherwood said. Underwood. I watched too much House of Cards, I must say. Admittedly, due to a lack of alternatives, London would hardly dare to terminate the EU exit treaty or the trade agreement. But the situation is still far from finding an amicable solution to the situation, said the expert from the University of Surrey. The trade expert David Hennig from the think tank European Centre for International Political Economy told the DPA that the step of the EU Commission was inevitable. Relationships remained extremely difficult. Much of this difficulty is due to the UK government's attempt to reconcile its promises regarding trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland with the treaty they signed, said Hennig. The so-called Northern Ireland Protocol in the withdrawal treaty provides that some rules of the EU internal market continue to apply to Northern Ireland. This should make controls at the land border with the EU state Ireland on the common island superfluous. But this creates a goods border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Imports need to be controlled. As a result, supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland remained empty at times and in certain locations. As a result, Great Britain unilaterally extended an agreed grace period. The EU will stick to its interpretation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, said Hennig. As a result, relations between London and Brussels would continue to suffer from the British government's difficulties with the protocol. And nobody is surprised there. And another thing with that government, Michael Gove's promise to deliver a green Brexit has been savaged by environmental groups who warn that vital protections are being watered down. Safeguards for chemicals, nature, air quality and waste are all weaker since the UK left the EU, they say, despite the pledge that stronger rules would be a special prize from leaving the EU. The alarm is raised over watchdogs, including a new Office for Environmental Protection, which will be less independent and weaker than pre-Brexit bodies. The UK's desire to have the freedom to diverge from EU rules has left holes in existing standards and compromised cooperation on important issues, a report concludes. And replacing the EU's gold standard chemical regulation with a system with fewer staff, less funding and restricted access to data was putting public health and the environment at risk, they say. In an article for The Independent, the chief executive of the Wildlife Trusts warned the UK is in danger of regaining its 1970s slur as the dirty men of Europe. So they were not only the poor men of Europe, but the dirty men of Europe. No more slippery get-out clauses and polluter benefiting deregulation, Craig Bennett said. We were promised a green Brexit. Let's see it. It's well overdue. Back in 2017, Mr. Gove, the then Environment Secretary, blamed Brussels for everything from the deaths of fish, birds and small mammals to the end of weekly bin collections. Inside, the EU ministers have been and still are prevented from acting as they think right and as the people want, he said, vowing to do better. Yeah, but they blamed everything they did wrong on the EU that they can't do anymore, although they still try. But the Greener UK coalition of environmental groups said the situation had mainly worsened since Brexit, issuing its final report card in a series of assessments. There are some potential positives, it said, including plans to replace the common agricultural policy with payments based on whether public goods such as habitats and cleaner water are being protected. Similarly, while the fisheries bill does not prevent overfishing in UK waters, improvements in sustainability and monitoring activities at sea give cause for optimism. Mr. Bennett added, "Let's not pretend that the EU was the ultimate guardian angel. Half of UK's wildlife is now in trouble and many species, such as red squirrels, cuckoos and porpoises are threatened." But he warned, massive gaps in environmental regulations and enforcement have opened because of leaving the EU. What we need now are strong, legally binding targets. Becky Spite, chief executive of the RSPB, says, "We are in a nature and climate emergency. The UK's wildlife is in free fall and needs urgent action. What we have seen so far suggests a legacy of weakening many of the policies, regulations and legislation we urgently need. Of 8 areas monitored, the report placed half nature, chemicals, air quality and waste on red alert at the highest level of risk. The outlook for the others, water, climate, sea life and agriculture, was described as uncertain at best." And government ignorance of the arts is putting British musicians' livelihoods at risk, Harriet Harman has argued, in a call for an end to the post-Brexit bureaucracy for musicians looking to tour in the EU. The Labour MP unveiled a 10-point plan of proposed measures, backed by industry bodies such as the Musicians' Union, UK Music, and the Incorporated Society of Musicians, that would allow UK musicians to tour Europe without the need for visas and work permits, and the same for EU musicians visiting the UK after a period of what she calls unnerving silence on the issue from the government. In January, the UK and the EU engaged in a protracted blame game regarding the lack of an arrangement to allow musicians to work freely across the continent. The government has said that making exemptions for musicians would go against its mandate to end freedom of movement and set the doors open if the EU wishes to renegotiate. In February, a House of Commons survey of musicians who signed a petition calling for visa-free touring found that 81% of respondents said they were now likely to stop touring Europe. In addition, 60% said they were considering a change in career. Harman told The Guardian that the government's position on freedom of movement meant they had boxed themselves into a corner. There was no time to waste on the issue, she said. If the government didn't act now, nothing is going to happen on this issue except that the shutters will come down. If touring Europe became prohibitively expensive, orchestras and opera houses would be forced to ask the government to cover financial losses, she said, and argued that the government needs to negotiate new arrangements with the EU countries, prioritizing important touring nations such as Spain, Italy and Portugal, which do not offer cultural exemptions for work permits. Exceptions should be made for musicians because their work isn't viable in any other forums, she said. The idea that this is the thin edge of the wedge on freedom of movement shouldn't stop the government doing what makes sense and what is necessary. She likened the idea to the so-called elite visa announced at the 2021 budget, which makes it easier for researchers, engineers, and scientists to come to the UK. Harman called for the extension of furlough and self-employed support for the music sector until the Europe issue was resolved, in recognition of the fact that because the government hasn't succeeded so far, people are losing a great chunk of their income. The issues now facing the UK music industry have been evident since before the Brexit vote in 2016. Harman described the government failure to address these issues as multifaceted. She accused the government of ignorance regarding the financial contribution of the British music industry, valued at £5.8 billion in 2019, and additionally music tourism. Complacency was also to blame, she said. There's the assumption that somehow it's going to be perfectly all right because musicians always have been, and they are so successful, so they'll be fine. And also partly, oh well, it's just a few middle-class people, which is completely wrong. The financial necessity of touring being part of the business model of UK musical activity is absolutely beyond doubt. But there are also artistic issues because music thrives when there's a cultural interchange and artists are able to collaborate. And that generates even more artistic creativity. Harman proposed the creation of a British Music Export Office and the appointment of a minister to lead on UK-EU negotiations and coordinate support for musicians dealing with visas and other obstacles until the matter is resolved. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel. Auf Wiedersehen.